Welcome to Season 3 of Titanic Talk. Here we feature stories from the independent documentary Ship of Dreams Titanic Movie Diaries and continue to explore all aspects of the iconic ship. From James Cameron's epic, groundbreaking movie to the history and legacy of Titanic herself. Actors, historians, authors, descendants and fans come here to talk about Titanic. This is your first-class ticket to everything aboard the Ship of Dreams. Ship of Dreams Titanic Movie Diaries is distributed in the US by Freestyle Digital Media. It's now available to rent or own on Apple TV, Amazon, and many other platforms. Please be sure to like and leave a review.
Time flies when you are having fun, and Alexandra Boyd and I have a lot of fun when we do Titanic Talk. So welcome everyone to the season finale of the third season of Titanic Talk, where we're going to go through some of our highlights of this season. How does that sound, Alexandra?
It sounds great. And I also, just for the record, I went back to our Buzzsprout platform where I post everything, and then it goes out to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all of those places. Since April 2023, when we began this masquerade, 25,000 downloads.
That's not, and is that just on Buzzsprout, or is that?
Yes, and then there'll be more.
So that doesn't even count. I don't use Buzzsprout, so I don't even, that none of those downloads were from me.
So people either are listening on the Ship of Dreams film.com website, you can listen there. You can go to YouTube and watch us there.
That's what I like. I like the visual.
Yeah, and then in order to they don't do it very well. In order to gather all of the platforms, I have to go into the backstage of all of them, and so at least 25,000 downloads. And the beauty, as we've talked about before, the beauty of doing a podcast is that it's not one and done and it's out there in the ether. It's like the archive will be. So if you're listening to us for the first time, where have you been? Living under a rock or under an iceberg? If you're listening to us for the very first time, you can go all the way back and listen to us from James Cameron's film, to explorers, to authors, including your good self, and all sorts of people, collectors and fans, and people who just have a very close association with Titanic, as do we.
I'm constantly turning new people onto it. And I spoke to a gentleman this morning who's got a podcast about life on a cruise ship. And he just talks to people who have worked in the cruise industry. And he wanted to talk to me because I'm increasingly doing more of that. And he wasn't aware of, he had no idea of my Titanic connection. I was like, well, then how did you find me? And he was so excited to tune in and start the process of listening to our episodes. And I also said to a publicist friend of mine who's like me, old school, and appreciates television and radio. And like, oh, if you want to promote something, you got to get on a television show. And I was like, you get on a television show, if you're lucky, they'll post it on their website, and that's it. That's the bang for the buck that you get. Whereas if you do a podcast, and you may think the audience is not huge, but the fact is, as you just so eloquently said, it's there forever and it lives indefinitely.
Yes, and like a good book, Nelson, you can go back and re-listen or reread it. One thing I would like to guide people to do is to go back to one of our very early episodes and listen to Judy Prestininzi and Ellen Mower, because Ellen is actually very ill at the moment. And just listen to those two lovely ladies who are on James Cameron's Titanic as core extras for longer than any of us, and boy, do they have some stories. But dear lovely Ellen, there's a GoFundMe to help her stay at home because she doesn't want to go into care. She wants to stay at home, and I will post a link to her GoFundMe on in the notes here, because
she's so lovely. She's so lovely,
and it's everybody who really knows the film well. She's the frozen lady with the baby, which is such an iconic image from that moment in the film, and we've just become so close to everybody because of this film and this ship. It feels like family, So
she has been like yourself, but she has really been a champion of the Titanic film's legacy. She and Judy probably top the list when it comes in terms of cheerleaders for that film. They're really extraordinary ladies.
Well, and at any Titanic event, there's the two of them and Don Lynch, the triumvirate. Sir Don Lynch and Titanic, as I call him. They come as a triplicate because they all three spent so much time together on the set. Anyway, all of our thoughts and prayers, for whatever they're worth, but our thoughts and prayers and a little bit of cash out to Ellen would go a long way. I know, because the numbers add up.
Sure.
So yeah, shall we get a going, as they say?
Let's review. We printed out a list of this 13 episode season. So we're not tripsodecaphobic. 13 is a lucky number for us.
Yes.
In the year 13. And I'm looking at the list you brilliantly provided for us. The first episode of the third season was February of this year. So we started off the year with a bang, just in time for the anniversary. But yes.
It's because Ship of Dreams Titanic Movie Diaries finally was released on the public on Amazon here in the US. And then subsequently it's been released in the UK and Ireland. So I think we felt we need, with the launch of the film, finally, where everybody can rent or own it on Amazon and many other platforms, it was a good time to kick off season 3 again.
Your beautiful, beautiful documentary, which I might point out, if it weren't for your documentary, we wouldn't have the podcast, because the podcast was devised as an arm of the Ship of Dreams Titanic Movie Diaries universe, and has consequently taken on a life of its own, which is beautiful and will live on. And as we always talk about, we've made so many new friends as a result of the podcast, met sometimes in person, sometimes via Zoom, so many great characters and guests and audience, and it's been a remarkable thing. I guess there's something to this podcast thing.
Well, the ripple effect has been and keeps going for sure. So then by March you had something to launch and publish and tell us all about. Go ahead, Nelson.
You would think I would have a copy here to hold up, but I don't. My book, Kindred Spirits, A Titanic Tale, which launched just in time for the April 113th anniversary, which we celebrated in Long Beach all together with our friends. We'll talk about that in a bit. It has been a year of Kindred Spirits, A Titanic Tale for me. Much as you had your year of Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries, I had a year of that. And I went on a global book tour. And so, I mean, from Los Angeles to New York, to Boston, to where else did I go? And then very excitedly, I went to London and Belfast and got to experience everything that's in Belfast, the Titanic Museum, the Titanic Hotel, the Titanic Distillers, met some new wonderful friends in Belfast, which is now segueing into, I will be leading a tour of Ireland in October of 2026, all the details on my website. But I will be taking people, we meet in London, we go around the island and end up in Belfast for a Titanic experience. So it is extraordinary to me the way Titanic has taken over my life. And writing the book was something, you had your film and we were doing the podcast, and I've always been such a Titanic enthusiast. And as you know, my own personal reincarnation story, but I wanted my piece of the Titanic legacy, like you had your piece, and that's what led me to the book. And while I think it will be announced by the time this podcast is posted, but it's a secret as of the time of this taping, but I do now have a production deal going for the film adaptation of Kindred Spirits. That's why I was in Los Angeles recently. And what's interesting is the gentleman who is going to be producing and writing the screenplay adaptation has his own Titanic pedigree. His name is Jude Gerard Prest, and he was an executive producer on the Netflix documentary Titan, the Ocean Gate Disaster. He was in the submersible several times. He worked closely with Stockton. I mean, he was there for a long time and making that documentary. He also produced I think it won some Emmys, the Jeff Corwin's Ocean Mysteries series.
He's steeped in this world, so he's the perfect
It's
person.
that wonderful thing we talk about all the time, the coincidences, the tentacles of Titanic reach everywhere. And he liked the Poseidon Adventure growing up, as I did, but he wasn't, a Titanic nut or anything. It's just his career, his very successful broadcast career, just led him to me, to the book, and here we go.
Yes.
Off we go.
Yes. And I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all. It's like all roads, or shipping lanes lead to it, Okay, so moving through March, we had a very interesting conversation with Joe Gold, who was part of the Boston Titanic exhibition. And, let's mention also the sheer numbers of Titanic exhibitions that are all over the world at any one time. I think it's like in the 40s, isn't it?
You can Google it, and at any given time, there are Titanic exhibitions, both permanent and temporary, going on. December 6th, if you see this before December 6th of 2025, there's a virtual reality Titanic experience here in New York City. I'll be doing a book signing there. It's there, the hunger, as we discussed with Joe Gold, because he's not necessarily a Titanic enthusiast. He's a business guy. He produces events.
And you never know in our business what might happen. It's been interesting in Boston. In 1998, there was a display of Titanic artifacts, but the exhibit that we're currently presenting has never been to Boston. It has been everywhere. 35 million people have seen this exhibition. But again, you can't account for nature. You never know what's going to happen or what the competition might be. And it's a huge roll of the dice. So we're pleased. Sales are good. We hope they continue, but it's a long 3 months before we close, and you never know what can happen.
It was really interesting to hear from him how the artifacts were treated from a producer's point of view. He wasn't into it because, oh, look, a life vest. He was into it from the commercial side of things, and it was really interesting to talk to him. And I went to visit that Boston exhibition, and it was magnificent.
They all are. They all have something new to offer. I went to the one here in Seattle last year, and they all have different passengers, because of course there were 2,000 passengers. So there's more than 2,000 personal stories. Yeah.
Is that the one you went to with the perfume expert that we'd had on the show?
Yes, I did. Yes, with Jen. It was lovely. We had a lovely chat in her perfume shop in Ballard in Seattle, and then we Ubered down to the exhibition. It was lovely.
That was a great podcast. That was season 2, I believe. Yeah, but really interesting to talk about the fragrances that were recovered from the site, and to be able to smell them, that they hadn't been inhaled. Those essences hadn't been inhaled in over a century.
Dissipated. They had been hermetically sealed in their files and in a leather case. So they were just as fresh as the day they had been put in those little perfume bottles.
We learn so much when we do these, and through that podcast with her, the gentleman, his name escapes me now, but the gentleman who was carrying those perfume vials on his way to America, I was so captivated by that story that I used him as a character in Kindred Spirits, because we just sort of collect these people. And I might point out that you, Alexandra Boyd, and several of our Titanic Talk family also make cameo appearances in the book.
It's great. I love it. It's just a little Titanic love fest.
But we weren't. How come we weren't mentioned in Stephen Schwenkert's book?
I don't know. I really don't know. To be fair, he didn't know us when he was doing his documentary, The Six, and then writing his accompanying book, The Six. Talk about not highbrow, but talk about the depth of research that it took for him to really.
The book is not intended to be a companion book to the documentary. It is intended to be a separate work, related, of course, but there are things that you can do in a book that you just can't do on screen, or not without an unlimited checkbook. There are parts of the story that we just couldn't get into in a 100-minute documentary, and doing the book really allowed me to do that. So for the Titanic geeks, among us, both between the three of us and in the listening audience, it really goes much deeper into how did these men potentially escape from Titanic. So just a quick overview for those of you who are not familiar with the story. There were 8 Chinese passengers on Titanic. They were not stowaways. They were not members of the crew. They were fare-paying passengers. Out of those 8, 6 of them survived. Now, for foreign-looking, and by foreign-looking, I mean non-European-looking, for foreign-looking third-class male passengers, that is an exceptionally high survival rate. And that was something that grabbed me and grabbed Arthur from the beginning.
Detective work at finding the families of the 6 Chinese sailors who survived and have never been spoken about until he found that story. I mean, that's not fair. James Cameron did have an Asian character in Titanic floating on a piece of wood, but it was also too close to Jack and Rose and the piece of paneling and wood. So, but it's there in the deleted scenes, played by Van Ling, who has also been a Titanic Talk guest because he's a VFX guy and sorted out Jim's first computer back in the 80s. Anyway, listen to that podcast. You'll find all the backstory there. But Stephen, his documentary and then his book have really been groundbreaking, would you say?
Yeah, and I mean, it's just such a little known facet of the Titanic story. Of course, real Titaniacs know it well now, but in large part thanks to the 6. So if you're not up on your story of the survivors, the 6 Chinese passengers, that's the book for you.
Well, it's a book and a film because
the book and the film.
Yeah. Okay, so where did we go in April? Where should we have been? And that's where we were, on the Queen Mary in Long Beach, California.
We had a good time with that, and that was all organized by our mate Paul Carganilla, and he did a magnificent job, a hero's job. I know he had participated in an anniversary event at the Queen Mary the previous year and took the reins over for 2025, and he really pulled it off. We had a great time. We stayed on the ship, you and I, as did many of the attendees.
Emergency thing where we all ran into the corridors because the alarm went off. I honestly thought we were sinking.
Well, I don't know if we could sink in the harbor of Long Beach Harbor, but yeah, I know several people were in the hallways wandering around in their pajamas when that fire alarm went off. I never made it out of the cabin because I was a little disoriented and I wasn't dressed and I was trying to find my clothes. I wanted to find my wallet, my keys. If I was never coming back again, it was like, it was like I thought I felt a shudder. If I'm going to leave my cabin, I want to be prepared. And by the time
I grabbed my computer and my Titanic crew jacket. What?
Because you could always sell that crew jacket for a couple of nights in the hotel if you had to, abandon ship.
That's what I was thinking. It's such valuable.
Oh no, that was really good. And then you missed it. You didn't stay the last day. We had a memorial service in the chapel, and it started at 10 a.m. and at 10:10 a.m. there was an earthquake, a significant earthquake, and the Queen Mary started doing this, and you and I lived in Los Angeles for many years, so an earthquake, roll over and go back to sleep. But a lot of the folks at the memorial service had never experienced an earthquake before and were really frightened. So maybe that was the Poseidon or something, just telling us, remembering the souls from the Titanic at the memorial service. But it was very moving in more ways than one.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. And also, we should mention that we recorded a podcast on the Queen Mary. I almost said on the Titanic, on Queen Mary with Paul Carganello as part of his Titanic Legacy podcast, and James Penker. His amazing provenance is Titanic Honor and Glory, who are their renderings are featured in Ship of Dreams, but he has a podcast called Witness Titanic, and all 3 of us sat there on a panel. I felt like
it was good, wasn't it?
Well, I felt like I was at the BBC or something. They're always having people talking about things, boffins, people talking about things, and we were podcast Titanic podcast boffins. And
Yeah, it was good. And everybody who gave a presentation over the course of that Titanic weekend, we were each other's audience, and it was really good fun. So I know Paul's planning to do it again in 2026. So I
yes.
also highly recommend it. So much more fun than a high school class reunion.
Oh God. I actually avoid those now completely.
I don't think we have many left. There might be about 3 of us left.
Oh, I just thought you were saying years, but like number of the actual people who are still alive. Well, in May, oh my gosh, we managed to connect with another Titanic actress, Fanny Brett, who famously plays Madame Aubert, the mistress of Benjamin Guggenheim. What, she was a pistol, wasn't she?
Get the call. How did it happen?
So a month and a half later, my manager calls me. She's hysterical. She was like, "You got it, you got it, you got it." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "James wants you." I'm like, "Okay," So I go to Rosarito 2 weeks later to have my extensions done, and I meet the people. I also go into those amazing tents, looking like very high warehouses with levels of clothing that they had from the UK. This is the most impressive thing I've ever seen in my life, because you can feel the energy of old and real clothing, right? So here I was, they were like, the clothing ladies, they were checking me out. What are we going to do with her? How is the character? And they were like, "Okay, come." And we're walking. And then we would just look 1 floor, 2 floor, in the air, just like that. And she was like, "Okay, we're going to pick that dress over there." So they would go with a big stick, go and pick up that dress. So we picked up a few things. I tried about 5 or 10 outfits, and then we retained 2 or 3, I remember. Corsets, I had to try everything. I took a class also on knowing how to use all the silverwares. There were so many silverwares. So we had to learn how to eat caviar, because my character was on the dinner table scene, when Leo shows up, all, well dressed and all that.
Lynn Hockney was the etiquette coach, remember?
She was a lot of fun, and it's funny because she's almost, but thanks to the cutting room floor, you unless you know where to look, you miss her completely in the film. So to hear her stories, because she had a lot of stories, she had a lot of time on the set. She was an important character
Yes.
for the overall story. So it was really good fun to talk to her. She's a pistol.
Yes, well, and a real character as well, a real person like Guggenheim.
Yes.
So, again, if you know the story of him coming across the Atlantic with his mistress, and didn't his wife show up at the dock in New York going, "Where's my husband?" And they're like, "Oh, well, you're his, who are you?" She's like, "I'm his wife." Isn't that his wife? Wasn't there one of those awful sort of moments? Anyway, yeah, I'm sure there's research that can be done for the full story on that one.
Well, like you said, a real life character, but so many people who love that film are obsessed with Jack and Rose for obvious reasons. It's that generation's Romeo and Juliet. I get it. And a lot of people, even maybe as controversial as could Jack have fit on the panel, is the idea of, well, wait a minute, we see Rose's granddaughter who takes her out into the ocean with the heart of the ocean necklace, all that stuff. But so where did that granddaughter come from? And you have to start to think about Rose's life after she gets off the Carpathia. And that leads us to the next podcast.
Well, your brilliant idea actually is that, there'll never be a sequel to
Please no.
Please no. They sat around at Paramount and 20th Century going, how can we do a Titanic 2? So that was left to somebody else's terrible B movie. But we sat around with lovely Brittany Butler from Titanic Scene by Scene with Ethan Brem, and Zach all the way over in Australia. Super duper fan, Zach Douglas. And we just had a 40-minute musing about why happened in that huge lifetime between...
It's been 87 years, 84 years, however many years. What was the line she said?
87. How old was she when they found... It was a long time. I mean, your point is really good, Zach, about she walks off the ship in a coat and a flimsy dress and some slippers, And what does she do? What could we imagine she
I
did?
know
You know,
what's her first point? Is she gonna sort of, go to the corner bar and have a drink? Like she's gonna need something to eat? Like what does she do from that point? Like
dodging
there has
rude
to be
as well,
some sort of
dodging
like
her mother.
monetary gain to get to that next point. Like how do you don't just go through life for free. Like she's gonna have to do something. And I often sort of think, well, what was that next step?
I never thought about that, right? As soon as she docks on the Carpathia, like, first of all, she has to avoid her family and anybody else
Exactly.
on the
Yeah.
ship in order to get off. When they're at the dock, like, how did they not cross paths accidentally when she was getting to wherever
She
she
would
needed to
have
go?
been interviewed at the Inquiry, or at the very least by Walter Lord when he wrote Night to Remember. And but maybe she never did have children of her own. Like maybe her child was adopted that gave birth to Susie Amos's character. Who's I wish we had a name. She probably did have a name. It's what is the granddaughter?
Lizzie.
Lizzie.
He knows.
That's never mentioned in the film, though, is it? We never hear
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it is.
Where is it?
Have you met my granddaughter, Lizzie? She
Oh,
takes
is it?
care of me.
Oh, okay. Touche. Yeah, so maybe Lizzie isn't her blood granddaughter.
Bless her, there was stuff that went on. And you know, we have the evidence of the photographs, the black and white photographs framed on her.
Pardon the sirens. Sorry about that.
Oh, I can't
New
hear.
York City.
Yeah. I got pugs snoring, so you know. Is that idea of I think about all the places I've lived and the loves that I have loved and lost. That's like about 5. So imagine if you know it's 1912 and now it's the Roaring 20s and it's Hollywood and it's all of those, and then a life of family and a lovely husband, we're assuming, who was her granddaughter's grandfather, and then her mum and dad. What? You know, we had fun filling in the blanks.
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of fan fiction. And there's tons of Titanic fan fiction out there. And if somebody hasn't written it yet, imagining Rose's in between years would be a great place to start.
Yes. And always the joke of like, there she goes back to a guy that she spent like 48 hours with, and her poor husband is there with some dead pieces.
Yeah, he was the real hero of the story.
Chopped liver. Yeah. Anyway, you'll hear our full in-depth musings on that particular more light-hearted look at the what might have happened story.
Now, one of my favorite episodes of the season was from July. Was it July? Yeah, July. With our mate that we met at the Titanic weekend in April, Clinton Benelli, who has become such a sweetheart, such a friend. He's come to my cabaret show. He's come to my book signings. He came on the podcast, and he's a mortician. And he was the perfect person to ask about something we all think about. It's not a pleasant thing to think about, but the recovery of the bodies and how they would have been recovered, treated, buried, embalmed, et cetera, et cetera. And when you're a professional mortician and death expert, as Clinton is, it's not a squeamish conversation at all. It's very analytical. It's certainly a necessary, vital industry, and I just thought it was so fascinating.
It really was. And even in death, how the classes were separated, right?
It also depends on the kind of water. So, we have salt water as opposed to fresh water here, which can bring with it some degree of preservation. And then we have the temperature of the water. So we have, for lack of a better term, bodies, recently deceased bodies who have been floating for several days now by the time the CS Minia, which was the first ship to get out there, got out there. And you have this interesting phenomenon where the core temperatures of these bodies are right around freezing, because as we know, the temperature of the water, certainly in the night of the sinking, was about, I think, 28, 29 degrees Fahrenheit. So a little below freezing, but because of the salt nature, obviously, it's still liquid water that the ship was floating on. but you've got a core temperature that's gone down. So essentially, the body's under refrigeration. On the exterior, you almost have like wrinkling perhaps going on at the extremities. So interestingly enough, you can get a situation where you've got preservation by refrigeration going on, but also preservation by a bit of like almost like mummification by this more superficial exposure to the salt water.
All of the rich people's bodies were brought back to be given back to their families, and some people just weren't recognizable and were buried at sea. You know, it's fascinating in-depth look at the aftercare of
And he's so charming and articulate and fun that he makes it. He's such a teacher. He's such a great guy that it really was a wonderful podcast episode. And I was speaking of that memorial service on the Queen Mary. He extemporaneously got up to say a few words, and it was. He couldn't have planned something more interesting, charming, reverential. He's amazing, and I think you will be seeing Clinton take his act on the road. I think we'll be hearing a lot more from him on this subject.
Yes. Fascinating. And then not long after, in August, we had David Scott Bedard, who is the CEO of the British Titanic Society. So they're the OG Titanic Society, I'm assuming. There's many societies. But not only is he the CEO, so he's really connected to the comings and goings and the events that the British Titanic Society hold, but he's also a collector himself. He and his business partner have a vast collection of Titanic artifacts which go on the road. They're in an exhibition right now, I think in Atlanta, I think they are. I don't quote me on that. I will find out and put it in the notes. If you are geographically close, you can go and check out this virtual experience of being on Titanic. And he also was intrinsic and very much involved in the recovery and refurbishment of the Nomadic.
Yeah, in true French fashion, the first auction, which I believe was October 2005, the reserve was €500,000. But they announced before the auction started that if it didn't meet reserve, they'd arrange a second auction in January, and they would drop the reserve to €250. So naturally, nobody bid. So on the 26th of January 2006, Belfast City Council sent one of their representatives to Paris, and they secured Nomadic for €250,001. So Nomadic was brought back to Belfast on a floating barge in the July of that year. By this time, we'd already put together quite a group of people who'd been working on promoting Nomadic to try and raise the funds to buy her and bring her back. But then when we spoke to Alan Shannon, the permanent secretary, realized this wasn't going to be the case. He very graciously said he rang me about 2 or 3 days and said, "Don't worry, David, you won't be disappointed." So then, of course, we found out on the 26th of January that they had secured Nomadic. And when she came back in the July, there were over 30,000 people came to see her at the quayside by the Odyssey.
My goodness, it must have been.
Which you must have seen when you were at Belfast. She is docked.
I did. It's magnificent. And now his quest is to rescue the train car. The train would take people from London to Southampton to get on board to board the ships. And it's a very worthy cause. It'd be wonderful if he could have saved, as he did, saving the Nomadic. I think he'll have good success with the train cars.
Well, and I think we rely on people like David, who has, not only does he have the wherewithal and the connections, and people come to him saying, "I think these 2 train cars in Wales that in a field rotting away are connected to Titanic in some way." And he doesn't go, "Oh, that's nice." He goes, "Right, I'm on a mission. I'm on my next mission to bring, to save them from just disappearing into nothing and finding the stories.
I mean, there's a scene in the film Night to Remember where Lightoller is on the train to Southampton to catch the ship, and it evokes that feeling of like the preamble to Titanic and all the departures before the sailing, and it's very romantic. And I'm sailing on the Queen Mary 2 in January, and I'll fly into London, and we're going to have to drive to Southampton, but I'd much rather have gone in a fancy train.
Yes. The trains, yes. In August, again, we spoke to Kelly Squarcan, who we met at the Titanic weekend in April on the Queen Mary. And she has a fascinating book and let's call it a lecture or an education program that is about leadership, about the failure of leadership between the two captains on the two ships that were in signal distance of Titanic as she sank. And we all know that is the Carpathia, but many people apparently are not aware that the Californian was only 10 miles away, and that captain ignored the SOSs, went to bed, turned off the wireless. So she compares the Carpathia captain, who's like, we're turning around and we're going to get everybody, with somebody who was that much closer. And she takes it to naval colleges and military colleges and says, right, what do you think? Contrast and compare these two captains who had the same situation and the completely opposite way they handled it.
And in my research on Captain Lord versus Captain Rostron, what quickly became apparent is that Captain Lord would have scored quite low on honesty, humility. I think we can see that pretty evidently reflected in the way that he went about the inquiry responses, some of the things going on the voyage back from mid-ocean back to Boston, calling crew members into his cabin, demanding statements, all these sorts of things. Like basically lying and trying to have this whole cover-up thing.
But in his defense, and I'm just being the devil's advocate here, it wasn't a big surprise, was it? I mean, for a man in his position to shut down the Marconi room and go to bed?
With the wireless, of course, Cyril Evans was the only operator on board, and he had just gone off watch. The real issue with Captain Lord's leadership is just the fact that I find it very hard to believe that when Stone called down to report that he saw white rockets being fired, that's a very clear A to B, you know what that means. And so to suggest that those are company signals when it's been clear and communicated to you several times that those are white rockets, that has a very clear response that you need to take as a leader.
Again, another avenue connected to Titanic that is relevant today.
And well, because Titanic, as we've said this before, it's the third most recognizable brand after God and Coca-Cola. Mickey Mouse might be in there somewhere, but to take the story of Titanic and create her own industry of discussing leadership. And she's very successful. She's constantly on the road. You follow her on Instagram. Every week, it seems, she's in a different, in front of a bunch of different young soldiers or cadets, and talking about leadership. And she herself looks like a kid. She's just this gorgeous young woman I told her she needs to be a TV presenter, because with her brain and her beauty and her poise, she could really go far with that, and I think she will.
Yes. And ties Titanic as her launching pad. Absolutely. And then we were in the UK.
This book I actually had handy on my desk. Dan E. Parks. Very good book, The Captain, the Daughter, and the Spy. And everybody knows, of course, about E.J. Smith, the captain of Titanic, but he's a much maligned character many times, and the book explores his culpability, his reputation. It also goes into his surviving daughter, his only child, and her husband, who was a spy. And a lot of people believe that her husband, Captain Smith's, that would have been his son-in-law, was a precursor and actually a role model for the James Bond 007 character. So it's a very interesting read.
If you ever get a chance to visit London, go to the British Library and just start exploring, it's incredible what you can discover. And I spent many hours there, as well as a lot of other archives online, and did the legwork, going to Liverpool, visiting the various houses that he lived in, talking to the residents. You know, for me, I wrote the book for the Titanic nerd inside of me. So it's, in a way, I've tried not to be biased. I've tried to lay out all the information. So there's negative information about Captain Smith. You know, I don't paint him as a hero at all. You know, there's some quite negative moments during his life that I've not whitewashed. But by the same token, I've also shown the other side, which is very rarely spoken about, which is the fact that he was considered a very competent captain. You know, people seem to focus on some of the negatives, you know, like the Olympic Hawk collision, for example, and without actually knowing the details of that. So hopefully the book kind of illuminates people with what really happened, but also in an unbiased way, so they can make their own conclusions. You know, for me, he's not a hero, he's not a villain, he's human.
And we also got to talk a little bit about inherited trauma, you know, the effect they had to the family, her mum, and she had to leave Southampton where they lived because they were just vilified, a little bit like Ismay, I think. Like somehow
or the captain of the Californian. I mean, yeah, as I understand it, backtracking to that, yes, he's the villain of the piece because he turned off his radio and went to bed. But how, as I understand it, that was not illegal or unheard of to do when you're parked in an ice field.
Yes, and you know, the laws get changed when disasters happen. But you know, those people, he and Ismay, were actually present at the disaster. But the shakedown to the families, like somehow because they were so closely connected to Captain Smith, they were somehow also responsible. So I think she, in her later life, his daughter did, you know, do a lot to obviously to explain the situation, but became quite quite a prominent character or mover and shaker in the Titanic world. She didn't abandon it.
Yeah, she participated in the film versions of Titanic, the Barbara Stanwyck version, and she didn't like that one. And Night to Remember, she thought more of that one. But you make an interesting point about the legacy of these Titanic figures. And we had talked about Ida and Isidore Straus, whose pocket watch just recently sold for a record-breaking $2.3 million at auction. I think that's the most expensive Titanic memorabilia yet in auction. But we had discussed previously about how Ida and Isidore, after their deaths aboard Titanic, 10 days later, their children sold their house here in New York. And I've always perceived that as those ungrateful children. What a cold family that must have been, that they would so quickly sell the family estate. Well, I was wrong. I recently met our friend Dr. Michael Martin from the Titanic Trail in Cove, Ireland. He came to town and we met at Straus Park here in New York City before we went out for dinner. And I was taking him around to various notable New York Titanic spots, including St. John the Divine, where there's a stained glass window tributing John Jacob Astor. So I found out from the caretaker, picking up trash in Straus Park, about that house that was sold by the Straus children. They didn't sell it because they were unsentimental or wanted the money. They sold it because the Strausses, the disaster had made the Strausses so famous internationally that people were coming and defacing the house to get a piece of the house. They would break concrete or the stone and take it as a keepsake because, you know, this was before Taylor Swift. The Strausses were so famous because of the disaster that people wanted to, and they couldn't stand to see their house being destroyed and vandalized and defaced. So they sold it, they tore it down, and they built an apartment building in its place that is still there to this day. So if you go to the site of the Straus home, there's an apartment building that's been there for probably 113 years, 110 years at least. So interesting about when you talk about how people are remembered.
Yes, and the trauma that must have been terrible. Watching your family home being, pillaged brick by brick, and then making a very quick decision to say, right, let's just part of our grieving is to actually raise it to the ground so that can't continue. Gosh.
And fortunately, I mean, that brings in a whole other debate about what to do about historic sites like the 9/11 Museum or the 9/11 Memorial. How do you memorialize places? And they donated the piece of property that has become Strauss Park, which I highly recommend. It's lovely with a fountain and a statue, and it's a block away. If you're standing in front of where the Strauss house was, you can see the park. It's lovely.
Lovely. Well, always somewhere in New York to visit: Southampton, Cherbourg, Belfast, Liverpool,
Cove, Ireland.
Oh, yes.
Look up Michael Martin.
Oh my gosh, yes. So our final guest this season, and I would like to say that I've been chasing this little girl for 2 years to be on the podcast, and it turns out she's not a little girl anymore. She's a full-grown woman and actress.
They grow up so fast.
They do. Alex Owen Sarnos, who plays the adorable Cora in James Cameron's Titanic, and she has some love.
She's still adorable.
Absolutely. And we just had the most delightful conversation with her.
It was my very first acting experience ever of all time. I would do, my sister and I would play pretend and we'd kind of do that thing, but to actually go onto a set and then have that be your job for the day I didn't really understand it. I think it kind of took a while for me to realize what was going on. I had always wanted to be like in the TV as a little girl. I would watch Barney when I was 4 and try to like figure out how I could get into the television to go be in that world. And so going on set that first day and meeting Jim and meeting Leo and just kind of being told like, all right, now we're just going to play pretend that, you're drawing with him and because the very first scene I shot, it was cut. But it was me and Jack sitting drawing in his notebook. And then Rose comes down to the third class to get him right before they go up to the deck when he shows her his drawings for the first time. So I was kind of like the setup scene for that.
To be that little girl with that little face and that she does when he goes, "You're still my best girl, Cora. I'm gonna," it's just like a little chill. And I just think that what a lovely way to round out season 3, to come back to the film and back to all of that, the drama and the romance of the movies, which is so important to me. It's so, it was lovely. It was a lovely way to finish season 3. And here we are, Nelson, 2.5 years after we started.
And I think, I don't know what's next for the podcast, but we'll find out. The nice thing is we can do it whenever we want, or when there's somebody in particular we're dying to talk to and share with our family of Titaniac.
And we'll add it to the archive. I do have a rather exciting thing happening, but it's about 18 months away because there's always a new story to tell.
Well, I'm just grateful for season 3, certainly for our long, loving friendship of God.
It goes on and on and on and on.
Lucky us. You are a blessing to me. How appropriate that we're in the Thanksgiving time season of the year for me to have. I never need an excuse, but it's a good one to tell you how grateful I am for our friendship.
Oh, likewise, Nelson, likewise. And across this mighty continent, you're on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast, and we're still able to connect. We couldn't do that in 1989, 90 when we first met. We had to we had to go to a landline and pick up a telephone.
Well, that's how I got Dr. Ballard on the phone. I remember the curly cord, and I'm like on the phone. At least we had push button dial, so it wasn't so long ago that I had to dial like that.
Didn't know which way the dial went. All right, Nelson. Well, until the next time, that's all I can say. Goodbye.
A bientôt.
Since we recorded this episode,
Very sadly, Ellen Mower O'Brien has passed away. She died peacefully on Thanksgiving Day. Her family still have a GoFundMe page, the link for which is in the notes here. So if you would like to support her, I know there's many people in the Titanic community who would like to give something still, and any little amount will really help them with the ongoing costs that incur when somebody passes away. From me, Alexandra, and Nelson, once again, thank you so much for listening. We really value our Titanic Talk listeners and our community, everyone who's watched the documentary, everyone who's read Nelson's book. We look forward to seeing you on the next voyage, whenever and wherever that may be.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review. And if you'd like to hear more podcasts like this, hit the subscribe button. For information on where you can see Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries, go to shipofdreamsfilm.com. Titanic Talk is a production of Ship of Dreams Film Limited.